I thought the worst moment of my life would be hearing my husband say he didn't love me anymore, but I was wrong, because the worst moment was watching him smile at another woman like I had never existed. I was 7 months pregnant, standing across the street from a restaurant I couldn't afford, my hand resting on the curve of my stomach as the cold night air slipped through my coat, and through the glass windows glowing with golden light, I saw him, Jason Carter, my husband, the man who once promised me forever, raising a glass of champagne to celebrate someone who wasn't me. I hadn't planned to come here, not like this, not uninvited, but earlier that afternoon I had sat alone in our quiet apartment, staring at my phone, rereading his short message over and over again, working late. Don't wait up. Something about it felt off, not the words, but the absence behind them, the way they landed flat in my chest, like an echo in an empty room, so I drove, 20 minutes across the city, past familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign, until I found his car parked outside a place where people dressed in tailored suits and silk dresses laughed without worry. I told myself I was overthinking, that I would walk in, surprise him, maybe even laugh about it later, but the moment I stepped onto the sidewalk and looked through the window, everything inside me went still. He wasn't working. He wasn't alone. He was standing beside a woman in a red dress, her hand resting lightly on his arm, like it belonged there, like she belonged there, and he didn't move it away. Instead, he leaned closer to her, said something that made her smile, a soft, effortless smile I hadn't seen from him in months, and something deep inside my chest cracked in a way that didn't make a sound. The world around me kept moving, cars passing, people talking, heels clicking against pavement, but for me, everything slowed, like I was watching my own life from a distance I couldn't cross. I should have walked away. I should have turned around, gotten back in my car, pretended I never saw any of it, but my feet wouldn't move. My fingers tightened around the fabric of my coat, knuckles pale, as I stood there, invisible, watching my husband introduce her to a table full of people who used to know me, people who had been at our wedding, people who now clapped lightly as if this was something worth celebrating. I felt the baby shift inside me, a small, gentle movement, grounding me in a reality I couldn't escape, and I swallowed hard, forcing air into lungs that suddenly felt too tight, too small. This wasn't just betrayal. This was replacement. And the worst part wasn't that he chose her. It was how easily he erased me. Like I had never been there at all. My first instinct was to walk in and demand an explanation, to force him to look at me, to remind him that I was still his wife, but something held me back, something quiet and heavy that settled in my chest and refused to let me move, because deep down I already knew the truth did not need words, it was right there in front of me, reflected in the way he stood a little straighter beside her, in the way his hand hovered at the small of her back like it had once hovered over mine, careful. Protective, like she was something valuable, and I felt my throat tighten as I realized he had not touched me like that in months. I watched as the woman leaned closer, whispering something into his ear, her lips curving into a smile that felt practiced, confident, like she knew exactly where she stood in his life, and Jason laughed softly, the sound carrying faintly through the glass, familiar and foreign at the same time, and that was when it hit me, not like a sudden blow, but like a slow, sinking weight, the kind that pulls you under inch by inch until you cannot tell which way is up anymore. I had been trying so hard to hold everything together, to make sense of his distance, his late nights, his short answers, telling myself it was stress, that the baby had changed things, that we just needed time, but standing there, watching him introduce her to people who used to ask me about nursery colors and doctor appointments, I understood that it was never about time. It was about choice. And he had already made his. My phone buzzed in my hand, the vibration sharp against my palm, and I glanced down automatically, my breath catching when I saw his name on the screen, Jason, calling me while he stood just a few feet away from another woman, and for a second I could not move, could not think, just stared at the screen as it rang, the sound distant, unreal, until it stopped and a message appeared instead. Are you home? The words felt almost cruel in their simplicity, like a test I had already failed without knowing it existed, and I swallowed hard, my fingers trembling slightly as I locked the phone without replying. I looked back up, unable to stop myself, and this time he turned, just slightly, his gaze sweeping across the room, past the tables, past the windows, and for a brief, impossible second, I thought he might see me, might recognize me standing out here in the cold, carrying his child, holding on to the last fragile pieces of something that was already gone. But his eyes moved past me like I was nothing more than another reflection in the glass, another shadow in the night. I let out a slow breath I did not realize I had been holding, my chest aching in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, and I took a small step back, then another, the distance between me and that window growing inch by inch, until the light blurred and the figures inside became indistinct shapes again. I told myself to leave, to get in the car and go somewhere, anywhere, but my body refused to cooperate, rooted to the spot as if walking away would make it real in a way I could not undo, and the baby shifted again, a gentle reminder that I was not alone, even if it felt like I had just lost everything that used to define my life. I do not remember deciding to move, but suddenly I was walking, slow at first, like my body was testing whether it still belonged to me, each step unsteady on the concrete as if the ground had shifted while I stood there pretending everything was fine, and the further I got from that window, the louder the world became again, engines passing, distant laughter, the low hum of a city that did not care that something inside me had just quietly fallen apart. I reached the edge of the sidewalk and stopped, my reflection faint in the dark glass of a parked car, and for a moment I did not recognize the woman staring back at me, her face pale, her eyes too wide, one hand still resting protectively over her stomach like she was trying to shield something fragile from a storm that had already begun. I swallowed, forcing myself to breathe slower, deeper, the way the doctor had shown me during my last appointment, in through the nose, out through the mouth, steady, controlled, like I still had control over anything at all. I told myself to get in the car. I told myself to go home. But the word home felt wrong now, hollow, like a place that existed on paper but not in reality, because the man who made it feel like one had just rewritten everything without telling me. My phone buzzed again, softer this time, another message lighting up the screen, and even before I looked, I knew it was him. "Call me when you see this." I let out a quiet, almost humorless breath, my thumb hovering over the screen before I turned it off completely, the silence that followed heavier than the noise before it, like I had just cut the last thread connecting me to something I could not fix. I should have been angry. I should have felt something sharp and loud, something that demanded action, but instead there was only this deep, aching stillness, like standing in the middle of a house after everything valuable had been quietly taken away, leaving behind only walls and echoes. I glanced back once, just once, unable to stop myself, and through the window I saw him again, but this time something had changed, the table had grown larger, more people had joined, men in dark suits, their presence shifting the energy of the room in a way that was subtle but unmistakable, the kind of attention that made people straighten their posture without realizing why, and at the center of it, seated with quiet authority, was an older man I had never seen before. He did not laugh like the others. He did not lean in or raise his voice. He simply sat there, composed, observing, his silver hair catching the light, his expression unreadable but focused, like he was measuring something no one else could see. For a moment, his gaze lifted, not toward Jason, not toward the woman beside him, but toward the window, toward the street, and I froze, a strange, unfamiliar feeling running through me as if I had been noticed in a way that was different from before, not dismissed, not overlooked, but seen. It lasted only a second before I looked away, my heart beating a little faster for reasons I could not explain, and I shook my head slightly, telling myself it did not matter, none of this mattered anymore, because whatever was happening inside that room was no longer my life. I took another step back, then another, finally turning away from the glow of that window, from the version of my life that had just ended without warning, and walked toward my car with careful, deliberate steps, each one pulling me further from the woman I had been just an hour ago, and closer to someone I did not yet understand. I reached my car but did not open the door right away, my hand resting on the handle as if I needed permission from myself to leave, to accept that there was nothing left worth turning back for, and for a moment I just stood there, staring at the reflection of the restaurant lights stretching across the glossy surface of the vehicle, distorted, broken into pieces that no longer formed a clear image, and it felt too familiar, too close to what was happening inside me. The baby shifted again, a slow, deliberate movement this time, and I pressed my palm gently against my stomach, grounding myself in something real, something that had not betrayed me, something that still depended on me to stay steady even when everything else had collapsed without warning. I inhaled slowly, counting in my head, 1, 2, 3, then exhaled, trying to push the tightness out of my chest, but it lingered, heavy and persistent, like a truth that refused to be ignored. Behind me, the restaurant door opened, the soft hum of voices spilling out into the night air, and instinctively I turned slightly, not enough to be seen clearly, just enough to catch movement in my peripheral vision, and I saw them stepping outside, Jason and the woman in red, her hand now resting more confidently against his arm, as if she had already claimed a place that used to belong to me. He looked relaxed, almost lighter, like the weight he used to carry at home had somehow disappeared the moment he walked into that room, and that realization stung more than anything else, because it meant I had been the weight. I held my breath, hoping they would walk the other way, hoping the night would swallow them before I had to face the reality of how close we actually were, but fate did not grant me that small mercy. They moved toward the valet stand, just a few yards away, close enough that I could hear fragments of their conversation, her soft laugh, his low reply, casual, unguarded, like he did not have a second life waiting for him across town. I turned my body slightly, angling myself behind the car, my heart picking up pace as if I had done something wrong simply by being there, and for a second I considered leaving immediately, starting the engine, driving off before he could notice, but something deeper held me in place, something that needed to see it fully, needed to accept it without illusion. "You really should have told me sooner," the woman said lightly, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch the words, and Jason let out a quiet breath, the kind he used to make when he was thinking carefully. "I was going to," he replied, "I just needed the right moment." The right moment. The phrase echoed in my mind, sharp and hollow at the same time, and I felt my fingers tighten unconsciously against the car door, the metal cool beneath my skin. I wondered if there would ever have been a right moment for him to tell me, or if I would have remained the last person to know until it became impossible to hide. The valet brought his car around, a sleek black sedan that reflected the streetlights like glass, and Jason reached for the door, opening it for her first, a small gesture that once meant everything to me and now felt like proof of something I could no longer deny. As she slipped inside, he glanced up briefly, his gaze sweeping the street again, and this time it paused, just for a fraction of a second, somewhere in my direction, not quite landing on me, but close enough to make my breath catch, and I froze completely, every muscle locking as if stillness could make me invisible. But then, just as quickly, he looked away, his attention returning to the woman waiting for him, and he got into the car without hesitation. The door closed with a soft, final sound, and the engine started, the vehicle pulling away from the curb and disappearing into the flow of traffic like it had never stopped at all, leaving behind only the fading echo of something that had once been my entire world. I stood there for a few seconds longer, staring at the empty space where the car had been, until the silence felt too loud to ignore, and finally, slowly, I opened my own car door, slid into the driver's seat, and closed it behind me, the quiet inside wrapping around me like a fragile shield, thin but necessary, as I placed both hands on the steering wheel and realized that for the first time in years, I did not know where I was supposed to go next. I did not start the car right away, my hands still resting on the steering wheel as if I needed something solid to hold onto, something that would not disappear the moment I looked away, and for a long second I just sat there, listening to the faint ticking sound of the engine cooling around me, the distant hum of traffic blending into a low, constant noise that felt oddly comforting in its indifference. My reflection stared back at me from the windshield, faint and ghost-like against the city lights beyond, and I barely recognized the woman sitting there, her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes carrying a weight that had not been there that morning, like she had aged years in the span of a single evening. I swallowed slowly, my throat dry, and reached for my phone again, not because I wanted to answer him, but because some part of me needed to see his name, needed to confirm that the life I had just watched unravel had actually been real. The screen lit up instantly, a series of missed calls and messages stacking one after another, each one more urgent than the last. "Emily, where are you? Why are you not answering? We need to talk." I let out a quiet breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. Because the timing of it all felt almost cruel, like he had suddenly remembered I existed only after I stopped responding. My thumb hovered over the screen, tempted for just a second to call him back, to hear his voice, to demand an explanation that I already knew would not change anything, but instead I locked the phone again and set it down in the cup holder, face down this time, as if turning it away could silence everything it represented. I leaned back against the seat, closing my eyes for a brief moment, letting the darkness settle in, and for the first time since I stepped onto that sidewalk, I allowed myself to feel it fully, not just the shock or the confusion, but the quiet, aching grief of realizing that something I had believed in completely had ended without warning. The baby shifted again, a soft, steady reminder, and I placed my hand over my stomach, my fingers spreading instinctively as if I could protect this one small piece of my life that still felt certain, still felt mine. "It is going to be okay," I whispered under my breath, though I was not sure if I was speaking to the baby or to myself, the words fragile but necessary, like a promise I was trying to make real simply by saying it out loud. A sudden knock on the window startled me, sharp and unexpected, and my eyes flew open as my heart jumped against my ribs, my head turning quickly toward the sound, and for a split second panic flickered through me, a reflex I could not control after everything that had just happened. But the figure standing beside the car was not Jason, not anyone I recognized at all, just a man in a dark suit, older, composed, his posture straight and deliberate, like he carried a kind of quiet authority that did not need to be announced. I hesitated, my fingers tightening slightly on the steering wheel before I reached over and lowered the window just a few inches, enough to hear him but not enough to fully invite him into my space. He did not lean in. He did not rush. He simply met my gaze with a calm, steady look that felt different from anything I had experienced that night, not dismissive, not curious, but intentional. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice low and measured, and the sound of my name on his lips sent a small, unexpected chill down my spine, because I had never seen him before, and yet he spoke like he already knew exactly who I was. I blinked, caught off guard, my mind scrambling to catch up with what was happening, and for a moment I forgot how to respond, the silence stretching just long enough to feel deliberate. He did not fill it. He simply waited, patient, as if he had all the time in the world, and something about that steadiness made my pulse slow just slightly, grounding me in a way I could not explain. "You should not be alone tonight," he continued after a moment, his tone unchanged, almost gentle beneath its calm surface, and I felt my breath catch again, not from fear this time, but from the strange, unfamiliar sense that somehow, in a night where I had felt completely invisible, someone had finally chosen to see me. I hesitated, my fingers still resting against the edge of the window as I looked at him, trying to understand how a stranger knew my name and why his presence felt so different from everything else that had happened tonight, and for a moment I considered rolling the window back up, locking the doors, driving away without saying a word, but something in his expression stopped me. Something calm and unwavering that did not demand anything from me yet somehow made it impossible to ignore him. "How do you know me?" I asked quietly, my voice steadier than I expected, even though my heart was still beating a little too fast beneath my ribs. He did not answer immediately, his gaze holding mine with a kind of patience that felt deliberate, like he was choosing his words carefully rather than reacting impulsively. "I pay attention," he said finally, his tone simple, almost understated, but there was weight behind it, something that suggested he saw more than most people did, and for reasons I could not fully explain, that realization made me sit a little straighter in my seat. I studied him more closely now, taking in the details I had missed at first, the silver at his temples, the sharp lines of his suit, the way he stood without shifting his weight, completely at ease in a space that did not belong to him, and then it clicked, a quiet recognition forming in the back of my mind, the same man I had noticed inside the restaurant, the one who did not laugh, the one who simply watched. "You were inside," I said, more to confirm it to myself than to him, and he inclined his head slightly, acknowledging it without elaboration. "I saw enough," he replied, and those 3 words landed heavier than anything else he had said so far, because they meant he had witnessed everything I had tried so hard to process on my own, the betrayal, the silence, the moment I became invisible in my own life. I felt my throat tighten again, the emotions I had been holding back pressing forward, but I forced myself to keep my composure, not wanting to unravel in front of someone I did not know, even if he seemed to understand more than he should. "That does not explain why you are here," I said after a moment, my hand instinctively returning to rest against my stomach, a small protective gesture that did not go unnoticed. His gaze dropped briefly, not in a way that felt intrusive, but observant, before returning to my face, and something softened in his expression, just slightly, enough to make me aware of the shift. "Because no one should walk away from something like that alone," he said, his voice quieter now, and there was no pity in it, no judgment, just a simple statement that carried an unexpected sense of certainty. I blinked, caught off guard by the directness of it, and for a second I did not know how to respond, because he was right, even if I did not want to admit it. I had been alone out here, watching my life change without warning, and the only person who had noticed had been a stranger. "I am fine," I said automatically, the words coming out of habit more than truth, and he regarded me for a brief moment, his expression unchanged, as if he could see straight through that response without needing to challenge it. "Of course," he said calmly, not arguing, not pushing, but the way he said it made it clear he did not believe it, and somehow that felt more honest than if he had tried to convince me otherwise. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, just quiet, like a pause between moments rather than an end, and I found myself glancing at him again, trying to place why his presence felt steady instead of unsettling. "What do you want?" I asked finally, because there had to be a reason, there was always a reason, and people did not just approach strangers in parking lots without expecting something in return. He held my gaze without hesitation, his answer immediate this time, clear and unambiguous. "To make sure you are not left with less than you deserve," he said, and something about the way he said it, not as a promise, not as a favor, but as a decision already made, sent a quiet, unfamiliar feeling through me, something that did not erase what had happened, but shifted it slightly, like the first hint that the story I thought had ended might not be finished after all. His words stayed with me longer than they should have, settling somewhere deep where everything still felt fragile and uncertain, and I found myself studying him again, searching for something that would make sense of this moment, something that would explain why a man like him would step into a situation that had nothing to do with him, but there was nothing obvious, no hint of hesitation or curiosity, just that same calm certainty that made it feel like he had already decided something before I ever spoke. "You do not even know me," I said quietly, my voice softer now, not defensive, just honest, because that was the part one could not reconcile, the distance between who I was and the way he was looking at me, like I mattered in a way I no longer recognized. He did not look away. "I know enough," he replied, and the simplicity of it made my breath catch slightly, because tonight had been full of explanations that never came, full of things left unsaid, and yet here was someone offering clarity without needing to explain himself at all. I shifted slightly in my seat, the leather cool beneath my hands, grounding me again, and for a moment I considered ending the conversation, thanking him, closing the window, leaving before this turned into something I did not understand, but the thought did not sit right, not when this was the first time since everything happened that I did not feel completely alone. "Why would you care?" I asked instead, the question slipping out before I could stop it, and there was no accusation in it, only quiet confusion. He paused then, just briefly, his gaze shifting slightly past me, as if he was considering something that did not need to be spoken aloud, before returning to meet my eyes again. "Because I recognize when someone is being underestimated," he said, and there was something in his tone this time, something firmer, not louder, but grounded in a way that made it feel like a statement of fact rather than opinion. The words settled over me slowly, unexpected in their meaning, because all night I had felt invisible, dismissed, replaced, and yet he was looking at me like I was something else entirely, something not yet defined by what had just happened. I glanced down instinctively, my hand resting over my stomach again, and I felt a small shift beneath my palm, steady, reassuring, and I exhaled quietly, the tension in my shoulders easing just slightly. "I do not need anyone to fix this," I said after a moment, because that part still mattered, still needed to be said, even if I was not entirely sure what fixing it would even look like anymore. He nodded once, not disagreeing, not dismissing it, just acknowledging it. "I am not here to fix anything," he replied, his voice even, controlled. "I am here to make sure you are not left carrying the cost of someone else's choices." That word lingered, cost, and I felt something shift in my chest again, not pain this time, but recognition, because there would be a cost, not just emotionally, but in ways I had not even begun to consider yet, and for the first time since I left that sidewalk, I realized how much of this I had been trying to handle alone without understanding what it would take. I looked at him again, really looked this time, and something about the way he stood there, unhurried, unaffected by the passing cars or the quiet noise of the city, made it feel like this moment was not accidental, like it had been waiting for me whether I realized it or not. "And what happens if I say I do not? Want your help?" I asked, not because I had decided anything yet, but because I needed to understand where the line was, where his involvement ended and my control began. He held my gaze without hesitation, his answer coming just as calmly as before. "Then you will still have it," he said, and there was no force in it, no expectation, just a quiet certainty that did not ask for permission, and something about that unsettled me in a way I could not quite explain, because it was not control, not exactly, but it was not passive either. It was something else entirely, something deliberate, something that did not depend on whether I accepted it or not. I sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything pressing in from all sides, the past I had just lost, the future I could not yet see, and the present standing right in front of me in the form of a man who had stepped into my life without warning and spoken as if this was only the beginning of something I had not yet realized, and for the first time that night, I felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the exhaustion and the grief, not hope exactly, but the quiet awareness that maybe I was not as alone in this moment as I had believed just minutes before. The silence between us stretched just long enough to feel real, not empty, but full of everything I had not said yet, and I realized I was no longer thinking about the restaurant or the man who had just driven away without looking back. I was thinking about this moment, about the strange calm that had replaced the chaos in my chest, about the way this man stood there as if nothing around him could rush him or shake him, and for the first time that night, I did not feel like I was reacting, I felt like I was choosing what came next. I exhaled slowly, my fingers loosening slightly on the steering wheel, and I glanced down at my phone again without picking it up, knowing there would be more messages waiting, more questions I was not ready to answer, and I made a quiet decision to leave it there, unanswered, for now. "What is your name?" I asked, my voice softer, not because I was afraid, but because something about this moment felt like it needed to be handled carefully, like speaking too loudly might break whatever fragile shift had just happened inside me. He did not hesitate. "Victor," he said, and then after a brief pause, "Victor Romano," and the name settled in my mind with a weight that I could not immediately place, but it sounded familiar in a distant way, like something I had heard in passing but never paid attention to until now. I nodded once, letting it sit, and for a moment neither of us spoke, the quiet between us no longer uncomfortable, just present. "Emily," I said after a second, though he already knew that, and the faintest hint of something softened in his expression, not surprise, not curiosity, just acknowledgement, like a detail he had been waiting for me to confirm. A car passed behind him, headlights sweeping briefly across his face, and in that light I saw something I had missed before, not just composure, but control, the kind that did not come from trying, but from knowing exactly where he stood in every situation, and it made me realize that whatever he meant by help, it was not something small or temporary. "You said you saw enough," I continued, my voice steady now, "then you know I did not ask for any of this." He inclined his head slightly. "No," he said, "you did not," and there was no hesitation, no doubt, just agreement, and that simple validation felt more grounding than anything else had all night. I swallowed, the tightness in my chest easing just a little more, and I shifted in my seat, turning slightly so I could face him more directly instead of half hiding behind the frame of the window. "Then what exactly are you offering?" I asked, because I needed to understand it clearly, not in vague promises or assumptions, but in something real enough to decide on. He studied me for a brief moment, not in a way that felt invasive, but measured, like he was making sure I was ready to hear the answer before giving it. "Stability," he said simply, and the word landed with more impact than I expected, because it was exactly what I had just lost without realizing how much I depended on it. He did not elaborate right away, and something told me he did not need to, that the meaning behind it was already clear in ways I would only fully understand later. "You have decisions ahead of you," he continued after a second, his tone calm but firm, "and none of them should be made from a place of loss." I let that sink in, the idea of making decisions from something other than pain or reaction, and it felt unfamiliar, almost foreign, but not impossible. I glanced down at my hand resting over my stomach again, feeling another small movement beneath my palm, and this time I did not feel panic or fear, just a quiet, steady awareness that whatever came next, I was not making that decision for myself alone anymore. I looked back up at him, meeting his gaze fully now, and for the first time since he approached my car, I did not feel like I needed to pull away. "And what happens tonight?" I asked quietly, because everything else could wait, but this moment could not. He did not hesitate. "Tonight," he said, his voice lower now, almost reassuring without trying to be, "you go somewhere you feel safe," and the way he said it made it clear that was not a suggestion, not a request, but a boundary being set in place before anything else could unfold, and for reasons I could not fully explain, I felt something inside me settle, like the ground beneath my feet had finally stopped shifting, even if I had no idea where I would step next. I let his words settle in the quiet space between us, feeling them anchor something inside me that had been drifting all night, and for a moment I simply nodded, not because I had everything figured out, but because for the first time since I stood outside that window, I understood what the next step was supposed to be, even if it was only one step at a time. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine coming to life beneath my hands, steady and familiar, and the sound grounded me in a way nothing else had, reminding me that I could still move forward, that I was not as stuck as I had felt just minutes ago. My grip on the steering wheel tightened briefly before easing again, and I glanced at him one more time through the open window, taking in the calm certainty in his posture, the way he stood there without needing to say anything more, like he had already given me exactly what I needed to get through this moment. "Thank you," I said quietly, the word simple but sincere, because even if I did not fully understand his intentions yet, I could not deny the difference his presence had made, the way he had shifted something in me without forcing it, without asking for anything in return. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging it without turning it into something bigger, and for a second I thought he might step back, let me leave without another word, but instead he reached into his coat and placed a small card on the edge of the window, his movements unhurried, deliberate. "If you need clarity," he said, his voice low and even, "you call that number," and there was something in the way he said clarity that made it sound like more than just answers, like it was something deeper, something that extended beyond this night. I glanced at the card, then back at him, my fingers brushing against it as I picked it up, the weight of it surprisingly grounding for something so small, and I slipped it into the center console without looking at it again, not because it did not matter, but because I knew I would not forget it. I shifted the car into drive, my foot pressing lightly on the brake as I hesitated for just a fraction of a second longer, and then I looked at him again, meeting his gaze fully this time, not as someone lost or uncertain, but as someone who had just taken back a small piece of control she did not realize she had lost. He did not smile. He did not nod. He simply watched, steady and composed, like he was marking the moment without interrupting it. I released the brake, the car rolling forward slowly before merging into the quiet flow of traffic, the restaurant lights fading behind me in the rearview mirror until they became nothing more than distant reflections against the night. The road ahead stretched out, familiar streets that suddenly felt different, not because they had changed, but because I had, even if I could not fully define how yet. My phone remained silent. Beside me, face down, untouched, and for once I did not feel the urge to reach for it, to respond, to explain, because whatever conversation was waiting there belonged to a version of my life that no longer existed in the same way. I drove without turning on the radio, without filling the silence, letting the steady rhythm of the road carry me forward as my mind slowly began to settle, piece by piece, into something that felt less like loss and more like transition. My hand moved instinctively to my stomach again, resting there gently as I felt a small, reassuring movement beneath my palm, and this time I did not feel fear or uncertainty, only a quiet resolve that built slowly but steadily with each passing mile. I did not know exactly where I was going yet, not in the long term, not in the way I used to plan everything with careful certainty, but I knew one thing clearly as the city lights blurred softly past me and the night stretched open in front of me. I was not the woman standing outside that window anymore, and whatever came next, it would not be decided by the man who had chosen to look past me, but by the choices I was finally ready to make for myself.